Hello, everybody. So, with our whole quarantine situation, we're taking advantage and posting videos of doing certain uh, cosplay activities and the like. So today, I am going to be working on my dragon pieces for my D&D character cosplay for when next time I can go to Ren Fair. And so I'm going to teach you guys some basic things about how to paint and decorate certain items. And so that's what we're going to do today. So first we have to prepare the area in which we're going to be doing our painting, decorating, whatever it is you're actually doing. So the first thing you gotta think about is what are the things you're going to be using to decorate. So if you're using things like spray paints or any kind of aerosol-based products, certain products that are going to have a strong odor to them when using them, or are going to have a strong chemical smell to them. Those types of things you're actually going to want to do those outside. I wouldn't do them inside unless it's a very well ventilated with lots of fans and windows are open. So it's best just to be safe and do those things outside. But today I'm not going to be using any of those kind of things, but just so you know, in those situations, it's best to do those outside in a yard or something like that. So today we're going to be painting with acrylics. So basically we just have to prep our indoor area so that we don't make a mess. And I prepped my area by laying down some newspaper I had at the house. Newspaper will work very well in most painting situations, or you can use a sheet, maybe a towel, something that, again, you don't mind if it gets messy or dirty, that the point is for you to paint on it and then clean it separately or throw it away. Okay, so once you have your newspaper laid out, another key thing you have to consider when you're going to be working with paint or other decorative type of materials that can spread or get on things is you want to make sure you're wearing clothes that you don't mind if you get paint on them or if they get dirty from like being on the floor or if you're outside from dirt, grass, and spray paint and all that other stuff. So you want to wear clothes that if you get paint or whatever on them, you're not going to be upset about it. Okay? So I have my newspaper all laid out and set up, and I even have myself a little pillow to sit on. Oopsie. Since I'm going to be on a floor, so that my butt doesn't hurt. Also, this pillow is an old pillow that I actually used to sit on in my desk chair a lot. So I don't mind if I get paint on it. It's fine. Again, everything you're using, you want to make sure that the things that you don't want to get the paint on are protected, and the things that you can't protect are things you don't mind if you get paint on, and so forth. So it's all about prep work and getting everything set up beforehand. Before you even start painting, you have to make sure your area is what it needs to be. Items I'm going to be painting are going to be this. Hold on, are going to be this dragon tail, these dragon wings, and this dragon mask. That I have my area set up, I'm properly attired, I have my items that I'm going to be decorating. I also have to have my tools. So I have various styles of paintbrushes and sponges. I have a little palette that I can put my paint on. If you don't have one of these, that's fine. I got this from Walmart, I think. But you can use things like if you have disposable Tupperware containers, those are also pretty good for putting your paint in or on, like lids of those kinds of lids of Tupperware containers are good. And then you could use the Tupperware container itself as your cup of water, which I just realized I forgot. I'll have to go run and grab that. Because you'll need to have, if you're working with acrylic paint, if you're working with most paint that you're going to have to apply with a brush, you're going to want to have some water, or if it's like oil-based paint, solvent in a cup to remove the paint from the brush as you go. Especially if you're going to be using the same brush and switching between different colors. But if you don't have something like that, you could use a plastic cup, a throwaway cup. You can use like regular mugs and stuff as your wash cup. You just have to be careful because sometimes the watery paint in the cup can stain a cup. So I would suggest if you're going to use a non-disposable item, if you're going to use a cup that you're not going to throw away after, pick a cup that you'll use primarily for this function from then on the off chance that it does discolor the cup. So let me go grab my water. So now I have my water. It's also a good thing with like acrylics. If when you start off your project, if your water is warm, like maybe even borderline hot, but not boiling hot, just like has some heat to it because it'll get the paint off the brush better, more easily. It'll get the paint off the brush more easily. Obviously, the longer your project is, by the end of it, it's going to get colder at room temperature, and then maybe even cold depending on the temperature of your room. But at least starting off, it'll help clean it more in the beginning of your project. Everything is ready to go. We can start painting. When you're working with certain paints, depending on the paint, I would say most paints, but especially with acrylic, which is what we're using, you want to shake it up every time you use it because parts of the paint will settle to the bottom and your colors might be a little off depending. Obviously this is white I'm holding, but with other colors it might be off. So you always want to shake it. And I don't mean just the first time you use it. You shake it every time. Because if they're sitting on your shelf for a while, in between uses, stuff's going to settle to the bottom and it's not going to be mixed well and the color's not going to be exactly what you want it to be. So you always want to shake it really well before you use it. So the colors I have today are white. I don't know if it's a fancy name of white because some paints have fancy names. Then we have, this is school bus yellow, I believe. Yes, school bus yellow. And then we have a metallic gold paint. Because the dragon that I'm making is a gold dragon. So, the reason I brought out the white is there's going to be some things we're going to have to touch up. Because I bought let's start with the tail. I bought these items in white because they didn't come in any color that was close to what I was looking for. So I bought them in white because I figured the white would make it easier to paint them because certain items, depending on the color they are, you're going to have to do like a light base coat, usually of white, before you can put your color on them, depending on what it is. So I can tell, because there's a couple of nicks in the foam, that this foam was originally white or gray. Or not white, black or gray. It's a little bit difficult and I don't want to split it. So the foam, because this is foam, is a darker color. And they painted it white, but they also have darker areas of shadowing on it, which some of them won't be an issue, but there are certain little spots on here I might want to touch up with the white paint before I go over it. So the point is I'm going to paint this, I'm going to use we're going to use the white to touch up any spots that look like they're a little too dark for the other colors we're going to be using to cover. Then we're going to do a base coat over that of school bus yellow. So this entire tail will be painted school bus yellow. And then once that's down, we'll go over it in the metallic gold in various areas. Now the reason I'm using acrylics is because the items I am painting are foam. So you have to take that into consideration when you're deciding what to use when painting or decorating an item. You have to think about what is the material made out of. Because it's made out of foam, spray paint might eat through it. Because certain materials, if you use spray paint on them, the spray paint actually dissolves them. And foam type materials is one of them. Spray paint is good for metals, cardboard items, things of that nature, but if you're using something that's made out of foam or like a thin plastic, it runs the risk of melting it and basically ruining the item. If it's a thing that you're making from scratch, like if I was to be making the tail out of, like cutting this tail out myself, and you want to know if it's a type of material that can be used with certain things, you could do a test item. So say I bought a chunk of foam that I was planning to use to cut the tail out of. I would take a small piece of that foam and I would test the different types of paints that I was considering using on it, see how it reacts, and go from there. So even with a finished item, I'm going to test it. I'm going to put the paint on a small spot on the tail that's not as easy to see. And if for some reason it doesn't take the color right, then I'll have to consider some other method. Acrylic should be fine. Excuse me. Acrylic should be fine on this type of item, but just to be safe, you always want to test things by coloring a small, discrete area of the item with it first, and then if it looks good, go from there. Now, another thing you want to remember when painting is you don't want to put too much paint on the brush. You don't need a lot usually, just a couple of dabs, and you just dip it in the paint and then dab off the extra. For very similar to how you might use nail polish, but not everybody uses nail polish, so that's not a good example. But you don't need to have a lot of paint on the brush. You don't want your brush dripping or soaked with the paint. You want just enough to spread it on evenly. That's why you have your little pool here. You can just go back and forth as many times as you need to. And then when you're putting it on the item, you want to spread it nice and thin. You don't want it to be gobby or chunky or have too many like thick strips of of paint on it. You want it to be thin and smooth, just enough to cover the area you're wanting to cover. So as you can see, most of this side of the tail is done. I just have to do the tip. So what I'm doing is I'm going over the darker gray areas with the white so that it has a more overall white base to then when I put on the yellow, which is a light color, it'll pop better. Some colors, some darker colors will cover certain items better, so you don't always need to do a base coat on something that you're working on to make it pop, but you just have to, again, you could do a test section to figure out if you need to do a base of a lighter color, usually white, over the item first and then put on the color, or if you can put the color on directly. Usually the darker the color is, the easier it is to get away with doing that, but it's not always something that you can do. And so just to avoid not having the coverage I need, I'm going over the dark gray areas of the tail and the wings with this white color, with white so that when I put the yellow on it, it'll pop better. So I finished the first side of the tail. So I want to give it a minute to dry before I flip it over and paint the other side. Acrylic paint generally dries pretty fast, not instant, but so while while the tail is drying, I'm going to try to scooch it over this way without not, see, yeah, I got paint on my hands. I'm trying to avoid paint. It's nearly impossible to not get paint on your person when you're painting something like this, especially. At the very least, you're going to get it on your hands. Acrylic paint washes off very easily with soap and water, so it's not a big deal. Actually, I prefer to like rub it around a bit because I'd rather have it dry, covering more of my hand than just a wet spot that if I touch something else. So I usually rub my hand so that it dries it out. So while that's drying, I'm gonna pre-paint this side of the wings. That way, then while that's drying, I can go back to the tail and then do the other side of the wings. That's the convenient thing about having multiple items you need to paint, is that you can paint them one right after the other all of one side, and then depending on how many items you are, hopefully by the time you finish that, the first item is dry enough that you can paint the other side. So that's what I'm going to do next. So, see you in a minute. Alright, so as you can see, I finished the little bit of pre-painting on the front, or this side of the wings. So now I'm going to put them, gotta bend my leg. Okay. Put them over here so that they can dry. And let me check the tail. Yeah, looks like there's spots. Most of it's dry, but it looks like there's a couple of spots left that are still a little damp. So we're going to let that sit a bit longer and move on to the dragon face mask thing. So with this one, I bought one that was not white. I bought one that was mostly already a little bit on the yellow gold color. It's gold and orange. So what I want to do with the white is I'm just going to go into the darker orange areas and just gently, like, don't paint, but just like poke at it. Like with these, I did more of a painting motion type of thing, but with this one, I'm going to dab. That's what I want. I'm going to dab at the darker areas, like the creases and the parts that are more orange with the yellow or with the white, so that when I go over it with the yellow, it'll cover better, because oranges are going to be a little on the darker side. It'll be a little harder for the yellow to cover it. Now I could test it and put a little bit of the yellow on it somewhere on a small part of the orange to see, but since I have to wait for these to dry anyway before moving on, I'm just going to put the white on it and hope that works out. Also, the teeth on the mask aren't, the paint doesn't cover them as well as I would like to, so I'm also going to go over the teeth again so that they actually look more like covered teeth than they do right now. So we're going to work on that next. Okay, so as you can see, I've finished the base coat pre-painting of the white on all three of my items. The tail, both sides is dry, the wings, both sides are dry, and then the face mask, I ended up doing a lot more white on it than I originally intended, but I kind of played that by feel. So now we're going to do a base coat of, or a coat, because the white is technically the base coat. But now we're going to do a full coat of the school bus yellow, covering the tail entirely, the wings entirely, and then all of the white that's on the face mask, maybe a little other spots. So the mask I'm doing very much by feel. I debated actually covering it in white, but I figured this should be good enough to do what I need to do. And remember, like I said, you want to shake the paint as much as you can before you use it to make sure it's well mixed. And this is okay. So then I'm just going to pour that into my palette here. And we're going to start with the tail, move on to the wings. As you can see, unlike when I was doing the white, where I was just going over the darker areas on the of gray on the tail and the wings and everything else, I'm doing full coverage here on the tail. Making sure to get all of the nooks and crannies with the scales, because the scales cause a lot of little corners and things, so we want to make sure those are completely filled in as much as possible. So I'm going to finish painting all of these things solid school bus yellow, and then I'll see you when that is done. Okay, so now both sides of the tail and the wings have been painted full yellow, school bus yellow. As you can see, the mask I ended up painting over completely with the, I'll put it here, it's easier to see against my black hoodie. It's completely painted yellow. I ended up not using any of the original yellow coloring that was on it because it just didn't look right, so I just painted the whole thing solid. Now that everything here is dry, or once you're finished you finished the coat and it's dry, you want to look at it and see if there's any places on it that require a second coat. Now, I'm not going to, in general, go over the entirety of everything with a second coat. Sometimes there'll be items that you'll need to do that for. I personally don't think that mine need that, but I will go over and look and see if there's any like small spots that I just need like a little bit more paint, like a dab. So I'll go through it and dab what needs dabbing to cover up any of those small imperfections, that places where the paint was just a little spread it too thin so I could see through it, or just something for whatever reason didn't take properly. And but looking at the mask, I'm going to say that there isn't really, I mean, there's a few spots on here where it's a little bit thin, but since I'm going to be going over it with another color, because I have the metallic gold here that I will be going over everything with, I don't feel that I need to go give everything a second coat or do much touching up in spots, because if the coat of metallic should conceal any imperfections from the original, from the school bus yellow painting. So I'm not going to be doing that, but you'll have to take that into consideration when you're doing your projects as to whether or not you want to do multiple coats of a color, especially if it's the only color you're using. So if this was just solid yellow, I might go over everything with another coat. If this was all that I was going to do. If I wasn't going to put the metallic over it, if I was just stopping with it being this school bus yellow, then I was just gonna, then I would probably do a second coat. but because I have this other color that I'm putting in various places with it, I'm just going to leave it as is. Like I said, again, make sure you shake your paint well. Oh, geez, this stuff doesn't want to shake. That feels solid. Hmm. This one's sealed. The other one wasn't sealed. Oh, maybe once the seal comes off, that'll... Oh yeah, it's more of a bronzy gold. But, you know, we shall see what happens. Put that over there. Okay, so that should give us enough space, hopefully, for it to shake. Because especially with metallic colors, translucent colors, like certain colors where there's going to be multiple things in it, those definitely will settle to the bottom, and you have to mix them properly, otherwise you will not get anything. This is going to take a minute. That is not wanting to shake. There it goes. It's starting to loosen up now. See, that's exactly what I'm saying, because all of the coloring of all the metallic particles probably in it, the parts of the paint blend that'll give it the metallic sheen, probably all settled to the bottom, and that's why this was so difficult to shake, because it was all solidified, but now it's loosening up. It's taking a second, but I can feel it moving around in there now, which is what you want. You want everything to be well mixed and well blended before you start putting it on your item, because then you'll get splotchy coloring, or if it's something that has reflective pieces in it, you might get a chunk of the reflective pieces in one spot as if it spread nicely over the throughout. So you gotta really make sure. All right, that's probably as good as that's gonna get. All right, so let's pour some of this out. See how that looks. It looks nice. It's a lot darker than I thought. And with the gold paint, I'm going to use the mask partially as a test piece because the ears here have a nice large surface area, and I'm going to paint those solid with the gold and see how that looks. And then so Bob, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the ears solid, and then not sponge it, but basically the different spikes and things on the forehead part of this, I'm going to do more of a this motion in between, so that the paint gets down in between the spikes on the brow, as opposed to just painting and doing a full coverage, so that it's more like the darker areas of the brow will have this in it. And then I'll see how that looks, and that'll dictate to me where else on the face I want to put this silvery gold, or not silvery gold, this it looks bronzy, but this gold metallic. From this, I'll figure out where else on the face I want to put it, and that'll also tell me how I want to use it on the larger pieces of the body, because there's a few ways I could use it. I could use it to try to do more overall coverage situation and to have this yellow like peek through a thin layer of the metallic, or I could use the metallic like shadowing, where only like deep grooves and like crevices you'll see the metallic come through, or vice versa. Use metallic on more flat areas and have the school bus yellow be the in between crevices part. So I'm going to work on the face first, then I'll show you how the face turns out, And then after that, I will do the wings and tail. Okay, so I finished the mask, putting the gold metallic on it. I'm bringing it closer because it'll be easier to see the detail. So as you can see, there are some areas, like the tips of the horn, where I did more of a solid, and then other areas, like where there is the smaller horns and more of the scaly breakup, I did more of a stippling, where I just dabbed it with the brush instead of stroking and trying to cover every little inch. I just dabbed at it, did a couple of like quick swipes here and there, especially for these. These are more of like a swipe situation in order to get it be mostly look like it's covered with the gold. It's still wet. It's going to look a little different when it dries, but so you could see with like the ears are more of a solid. Just try to get it, are more of a solid, but you could still see like the bus yellow through it. This is primarily meant to make the metallic gold paint look more gold yellow, and also it gives the illusion of depth. Obviously there is physical depth because the natural shape of the scales are 3D, but like shading depth, which is what the mask came with, but it had a different color scheme. Just like with the tails and the wings, they were white, but they had areas of gray. And the gray was meant to be color accents to show shading. So this came out like this. So I'll be using the same basic technique when I make the rest of it. So the tails and wings I have to do next. As soon as they dry completely, they're still a little damp and a little wet in spots. I'll do a cursory glance, see if there's anything that needs to be touched up, probably not. And then I will put the gold on it. And that's what you'll see next will be the finished product with the gold on it of the wings and the tail. Hopefully I get it done before the sun sets. I'm going to be losing some light, so the lighting might be different towards the end of this video. It's already kind of different. If you're paying attention, you would have seen that the lighting has gradually changed over the course of the video because this is taking me many hours. This is not, oh, I got an hour to kill work. No. I had to paint one side, let that side dry before I could flip it over and paint the other side. Let that side dry before I could flip it back over to do the next color. So I had to do each side with the white to cover up the darker gray areas, and when I did the mask, then I had to flip it to do the other side, let that dry. Then I moved on to the yellow. Painted one side solid yellow, let that dry. Flip it, do the other side solid yellow, let that dry. So right now we're on the last drying. This side, the side it's up of the tail that you can see behind me, and the wings are still wet, so I have to wait for them to dry before I can do the gold to it. I was able to do the face part first because there's only one side to the face, so I didn't have to flip it twice. I also, as you can see, painted the teeth solid white. I had to go over the teeth a second time, at least some of the teeth, not all of the teeth, because when I painted the face part yellow, it got onto the teeth. Luckily, I didn't get any gold on it. I might touch the teeth up. One more time. If I feel like they need it, because the yellow will kind of bleed through the white. That's why you usually paint things white, because most colors, especially if it's a lighter color, darker colors will bleed through it. I said this already. I will and just keep saying this, but reiterating my points, because these are important things that you need to know if you're going to be painting anything, especially if it's something like cosplay. So yeah, we're going to do let that stuff dry, and then I'll show you a little bit of the final stage, and then you will get to see the finished product. Okay, so we are officially done. Still wet, but everything is painted. So once your item is been completed, you finished it. It is done. Aside from any obvious last minute drying, you have to start obviously cleaning up your space. And the first thing you want to start off with is emptying out your water cup that you've been using to rinse brushes in between uses and thoroughly wash out your brushes. So you're going to want to run them under warm or even a little bit hot water, and you basically just take your between your index and your thumb, you put the bristles, and let me grab one. Hold on. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is you want to take your brush, run it under the warm hot water, right? Then take your thumb and forefinger, obviously not so hot that you would burn your hand. So you get the water as hot as you can stand it without burning yourself. Put the bristles of the brush underneath it and work it with your fingers, okay? So you're going to want to spread, bring it a little closer. Spread the bristles as much as possible. Work the water in between the bristles and get out the paint. Now, if generally speaking, you usually just use hot water. You can use a little bit of soap depending on the type of paint you're using. Acrylic paint is easily removed with soap, so soap and warm water can work really well to remove it from your brush. But there are other paints that soap doesn't help, like oil-based paints. It won't really help with oil-based paints. Oil-based paints, there's actually a specific type of solvent that you can get that you're supposed to put in your water and that you're also supposed to use to wash out your brush. Oil paints stick more and they're a lot harder to get out, which is why you need a special solvent to do that. My hair is being weird. I, generally speaking, avoid oil paints. I don't use oil very often. Primarily, I stick with acrylic paints because that's just my personal medium that I enjoy using. But yeah, so you just run your brush under warm water, and you just want to work as much of the paint out as you possibly can by wiggling it and playing with the bristles and getting that stuff. Don't try not to flick it, because if this is wet and you go like this, it gets everywhere. You're gonna splatter everywhere. So try not to do that. Just try to gently keep it tilted downwards and work it between your fingers. And you do the same thing with if you're doing what I'm doing, you have a palette or something like that, you want to rinse that under warm water with soap. Obviously, if you're using a throwaway palette, if you're using like something you're just going to toss, then you just toss it. You don't have to worry about cleaning it up. Same with the newspapers. Like I have newspaper down. I'm just going to scoop all that up and put it in the garbage. Careful not to get, if there is any wet paint on it, pick it up cup it gingerly so that you don't like splash paint that's on this surface onto your floor or whatever. So if you're using newspaper, or if you have a sheet or a blanket or a towel that you're using as your protective layer, those you'd want to if it's on a sheet or a towel, I would say leave it the way it is until the paint is officially dried. Do not pick that up with wet paint still on it. And then once it's dry, you can scoop it up and put it in a special bag or hamper to be washed. Ideally, you'd want to wash that separately or with, like I said, the clothes that you're probably wearing that might have paint on them. And that's important, what I said before about wearing clothes you don't mind getting paint on, because I was extremely careful and I still have paint on my sleeves. I even got paint on my phone case. I don't know if you're going to be, hold on, a little bit of yellow paint right on his mouth. So I have to clean that off. So you want to be very careful with paint And that's why you have to prep as much as possible, because it will get places that you don't expect it to get. Okay? Um, yeah, and that's pretty much it as far as cleanup is concerned. You just want to rinse out your brushes well. Uh, One of the reasons you want to rinse them out is because if there's paint in there and it dries, it'll get all crusty. Paint flakes will fall out of it. It'll make it harder to use it again, because then you'll have paint from your previous thing like in there all crusty. Also, depending on the paint you're using, it can stain the brush. So as you can see, this one is purple, so it would be harder for something of a different color to stain it. But I have a set of white. I have some white bristles, so if the bristle's like white, it'll pick up a color like nothing. So if that's something that would bother you or you want to avoid, if a bristle is well washed but still has a pigment on it, you don't have to worry about that, because like I said, some bristles will stain no matter what you do. They'll just pick up a color, but they won't deposit that color as long as they're properly washed. As long as you clean it out completely, it doesn't really matter what color it turns. It'll still be a clean brush that can be used for any colors in the future. So that's about it. I will add some pictures to the end of this video, or maybe just in general on the Facebook page or something, of the finished product in like sunlight, because it's now dark outside. I started this when it was day out. It took so long. But I'll post some pictures of it in better light than is here. But I think I could probably pick up one of these. Could probably pick up the tail. Alright, now this side's still a little bit wet, but hopefully the lighting's not too bad that you can see kind of the detailing of it, both sides. So this side's still a little bit wet, but this side is completely dry, as you can see. So I just did a gentle stroke of the brush over it. So I went more, instead of doing like getting every little nook and cranny like I did with the yellow, I just swiped it with the brush. Swipe, 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 instead of like making sure every little bit of it was covered, so that the yellow still shows through and makes the gold a little richer. But yeah, so, and probably once I get it out in sunlight tomorrow, I might see a few flaws and might have to touch it up tomorrow, because that's another thing you got to think about with certain projects, especially if it's paint, is certain colors in like the lights you have in your house are going to show a little differently than outside. So it's good to get to look at your item in natural sunlight at least once before you are considered done, because sometimes that will make it easier for you to see small flaws. And again, nothing's going to be, it's okay if it doesn't turn out perfect. You don't need to be perfect with these things. For example, with this tail, you can kind of see it on this side, maybe sort of, but you can see it a bit more on this side. For some reason, the foam bubbled in a few spots just on the fin of the tail. Now I don't know if that's a flaw from the foam, this foam itself, from when they made it, or if that's just a weird reaction those spots had to the paint. But it's not that noticeable, and then if anything else, it kind of looks like scars. So like your dragon's been through a fight kind of thing. So that's another thing you can consider, is certain mistakes or flaws you can kind of work into whatever it is you're making. So like nicks, cuts in these, I can work into my thing because my character I'm making is a dragon shaman. So a person who's being slowly turned into a dragon who fights things. So my character will have been in battles. So thus any like small imperfections of that nature can be explained away as battle scars. Just, So that's some of my basic tips that I got for painting cosplay items. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. If you guys want me to talk about anything else specifically about cosplay in general, feel free to ask. If I don't know, I can always look it up and tell you when I find out. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hopefully will see you guys again in the future, either on here or back in the library. Happy quarantine, everybody.